Welcome into the Action Network podcast presented by BetMGM. Your host today, Brendan Glasheen, joined by Sean Zerillo and Billy Ward. That means we are here for a UFC betting preview. We're back in Vegas for UFC 303. Be sure to subscribe to our podcast wherever you listen to your podcast. Subscribe as well to our Action Network YouTube channel. You can hit the little bell on the side too. You get all the notifications. Billy Ward has a video out this week previewing the card. That comes available to you. But check it out, Action Network YouTube, if you are watching the show. And we appreciate those 5-star ratings and reviews if you enjoy listening to the show. If you're new, we'll do the same old song and dance. We're going to do the main event breakdown, fight of the night for Sean and Billy, underdogs, props, and some best bets before we wrap it up. All right, gents, let's start with the main event. We have ourselves a title fight, light heavyweight main event between Alex Pereira and Jiri Prochazka. Prochazka's line, Zerillo, has dipped a bit. That underdog price not quite where it was at the beginning of the week. As far as Pereira, he's pretty notable himself. You're interested in this fight quite a bit, just from a watch, never mind the betting angles of it, but discuss the intricacies of the fight itself and how you'd like to bet it.
Yeah, I think this is a better fight than Conor McGregor and Michael Chandler, which was supposed to be the headliner initially. This fight booked on short notice, and Jiri coming in off of a fight, very difficult fight against Alexander Rakic, where he took a ton of damage, but Alex Pereira had a broken toe going into his last fight and apparently broke another one in the cage. So both guys maybe a little bit banged up coming into this fight, not coming off of full camps, obviously on short notice. I was on Alex Pereira in the first fight. I bet him by knockout. The narrative going into that first fight, Jiri's shoulder injury, coming off of what Dana White called the worst shoulder injury he's ever seen, however much credence you want to put into that. But we really didn't know what Jiri was going to look like coming off of the layoff at the time. And I thought he looked really good in that fight. And that's why I've kind of pushed this closer to 50%. I had Alex as a 55% favorite in the first fight. Now I'm not adjusting these manually. I'm adjusting them, my projections, off of publicly available information out there and making an adjustment off of that I kind of like build in automatically to all of these fights. But I made Alex about a 55% favorite in the first fight using those projections. I make this fight, the second fight, about 50-50. And the line has moved more towards Alex. This fight was about -110 on either side. At close, the first time, I took +130 on Jiri in this fight. I'm mostly playing numbers, not the fighters. I would happily play Alex at +130, considering I handicap him as the favorite. But I essentially make Jiri 49%. Happy to grab him +130. Why? What did I see in the first fight that changed my mind? First off, he got takedowns. It wasn't known, one, whether he would proactively grapple, or two, whether he would be able to get takedowns if he pursued them. Well, he won the first round, getting a takedown and controlling Alex for 2 minutes. Number two, looks like he'll have better cardio. This fight extends. I think that was the assumption the first time, that Jiri would have a better gas tank, gone 5 rounds. We'll go over to share a hard 5 rounds where they were grappling a bunch, rolling around a bunch, showed really good cardio all the way to the end, ended up getting that late 5th round submission. But I think as this fight extends, not only does Jiri have the potential to win a round with pure grappling, maybe even win multiple rounds with pure grappling, but I think he'll win one of the final 2 rounds with cardio. So now you're talking about a 5-round fight. You give 1 round to Jiri for cardio, 1 round to Jiri for grappling, and the other 3 rounds probably 50-50 on the striking at worst. The biggest issue here for Jiri is leg kicks. Got his leg chewed up bad by Pereira in the first fight, has that long karate stance. His lead leg is always going to be there to get chopped. Rakic chopped up that leg too, fought through the pain, fought through the damage, and ended up knocking Rakic out. Now, the fact that Pereira put so much damage on that leg in the first fight is what caused the fight-ending sequence. I think Prochazka knew that that leg was going to go eventually, forced him to close the distance, forced the finishing sequence, and did get KO'd. But even before that sequence, he was landing some good combinations. And I think the biggest factor in this fight is the pressure that he applies. Because you look at Alex's fights against Jamal Hill, you look at him against Izzy, he's the one on the front foot, he's the one applying pressure, backing his opponents up against the fence. It was the opposite case when Jiri and Alex fought, where Alex was on the back foot. Alex was the one getting pressured up against the fence. And it really looked like he wasn't comfortable fighting off of the back foot. Obviously, he has that eraser, that huge left hand that can catch anybody and close the show and end the fight. But Jiri was landing the better combinations. I thought he looked very good in the fight up until he got caught. You could debate the stoppage all you want. Alex ended up in mount. Fight might have been over anyway, but regardless, taking the price adjustment here in the second fight, considering I thought it was a 50-50 fight the first time. I think it's still a 50-50 fight. I don't think Alex has particularly elite durability either, and I think Jiri is going to put him in positions to potentially land a fight-ending blow. So Jiri on the money line at plus money. I think he has more ways to win. I give him more decision equity. I think he can win via submission, and obviously either guy can win via knockout. I think fight ending via submission could be a very interesting play. Mm-hmm. Alex went for the sub in the first fight, tried to wrap up a guillotine. I think Jiri will absolutely go for submissions if he gets this fight to the ground, but I would expect him to be a little bit more proactive grappling this time and avoiding those leg kicks early and getting that leg chewed up early. I think he should grapple from the outset. We'll see if he does it, but I think grappling upside, cardio upside, clear plus money side on Jiri at plus 130.
Billy, in your Action Network UFC luck ratings, you urged folks to jump on the price earlier in the week. It has dipped, as I mentioned off the top. I liked your line in your write-up. He has a wild style. This is Jiri P. Has a wild style that leads to a lot of, quote, winning until he doesn't, end quote, and losing until he doesn't. Would you like to further explain?
Yeah, I mean, Sean alluded to it. Jiri won the first round in the first fight, not just based off his grappling, by the way. He was outstriking him, too. But he has so little, I don't know if the word is ability or interest in defense, but one of those, if not both of those things, that he looks great. He's doing his stuff. He's dancing around. He's moving. And then somebody catches him, right? And it hasn't happened a ton, and it takes someone of Alex Pereira's caliber to really worry too much about that. But yeah, that's what I mean by that is he's very often winning right up until that moment that he's no longer winning. And on the other side, we saw the coin flip of that against Rakic, where he's kind of getting beat up in the first round, but he has the power that all of a sudden he's just won. Like he was getting beat up, the live line was going against him, blah, blah, blah. He finds the switch and turns it off. So that is always a consideration with Jiri. One of the reasons, and I think it speaks to Sean's broader point of taking the plus money guy in this fight both times, is that kind of high variance is going to make it where you don't feel confident about either person. Either one can win at any moment. But yeah, I'm mostly with Sean on all the points. Got the better line earlier in the week. I think at this point, I'm clouded by anchoring myself on the line I got. With that said, if I hadn't bet it yet, Jiri inside the distance is plus 140. The fight's like minus 600 to get stopped. So, you can do the math on that and who you assign more decision equity to, blah, blah, blah. Love the plus 132, though. I would take that. Only thing I wanted to add on that Sean didn't get to, though, is this time around, Jiri has asked that Alex Pereira use no witchcraft, no shamanic influences, no spirits in the fight, and they just fight man-to-man. Doesn't seem like Alex is heeding that request. But, if it gets in the back of his mind and he maybe uses a little less magic this time around, that's got to favor Jiri. So we got that going for us, too. He's clearly the money line side here, like the grappling. And again, on a more serious note, as Sean pointed out, a couple fights away from the worst shoulder injury in the history of shoulders. So that's probably to his favor as well.
Yeah, I mean, that was just a huge narrative point going into that first fight. I didn't know how much it would affect Jiri. And I think in hindsight, the answer is probably 0 to very little. But just, as you mentioned with your final point, Billy, Jiri as the money line side. I think money line or pass on Jiri. If you like Alex, bet his KO prop. I just don't see Alex winning a decision at a high clip. If this does manage to go all 25 minutes with these new gloves that aren't generating KOs so far, at the rate that they were previously, I think it will even out over time. But if this does go to a decision, I think Jiri is much more likely to win it. As I said, at least one round on cardio, at least one round with grappling, and then probably one of the other three on a 50-50 striking round. I think Jiri is so much more likely to win a decision, so much more likely to win the late rounds. I might even be interested in a live bet on Jiri as well.
Oh, real quick, too, since you brought it up, both of Alex Pereira's last fights have been against guys coming off significant injuries in Jamal Hill and Jiri Prochazka. And I think the point isn't that his shoulder still hurt and he physically couldn't fight as well, so much as for 4, 5, 6 of the last 9-ish months, he wasn't training, wasn't sharp, wasn't getting the rounds in. And this is your first time back and you're getting thrown in there in a world title fight. So I don't think, and I could probably apply this to Jamal Hill as well, although I'm not sure how true it is. They were physically 100%, but there's that ring rust, there's that timing, there's that sharpness. And even if there was no injury, if you just told a guy he couldn't train for 6 months of the last year or whatever, he's going to be diminished. I think now we're getting as close to the best version of Prochazka, where before even if the shoulder was fine, there's some other things to worry about there.
All right, there is your light heavyweight main event handicap. Let's move on to the featherweight fight. Guys have targeted this one as their fight of the night. Brian Ortega and Diego Lopez, the matchup here. Similar price points for this fight. You've got Ortega, the slight underdog at plus 120, and Lopez at minus 140. Slight reach advantage for Lopez as well. Lopez, Zerillo, same question as always. Break down the fight. How you'd like to bet it?
So a bit of a mirror matchup here, but I think Lopez is the guy who's the better athlete and hits harder, and he's bigger. I didn't realize he would be this much bigger going in, but 3 inches taller, 3-inch reach advantage, and I would imagine he hits quite a bit harder than Brian Ortega. And Ortega's body is falling apart on him. He's taken a ton of damage throughout his UFC career, one of the most durable fighters we've ever seen. And that's both a blessing and a curse because it means he's taken a ton of damage. And he didn't get a world title belt wrapped around his waist as payback for all of that damage that he's taken. So I think the first round heavily favors Diego Lopez, and I like Lopez to win in round 1 by KO at plus 550 to plus 650 out there. I believe Ortega's never been finished, but very close in his last fight against Yair Rodriguez. Rocked bad, rolled his ankle coming into the cage. So he was hurt before the fight even started. And that's, I believe, the second fight in a row where he's done that, and or 2 in his past 3 where he's literally hurt himself and his ankle walking into the cage. So his body is shutting down on him. I'm not sure if he's training full time anymore. I don't know how he could be, considering what his body looks like when he fights. But as I said, Lopez is just the much better athlete, the much quicker athlete early. I think he's going to win the boxing exchanges. Ortega is very open defensively, which Lopez is too. But Ortega needs takedowns to win this fight, and he relies on the clinch to get those takedowns. He's not, blasting double legs reactively. He's getting guys up against the fence, using clinch positions, getting takedowns from there. Lopez is really strong in the clinch, strikes really well from the clinch, frames off of opponents really well, knows how to land strikes, knows how to separate. I think Ortega is going to have a really difficult time getting takedowns in the first round if he wants them, and I would imagine he would want them. Lopez normally happy to accept bottom position, accept those takedowns from opponents because he is phenomenal jiu-jitsu and he's great off of his back. I don't think he's going to be as willing to accept the takedowns in this fight. I think the reason why you see him taken down constantly and you expect that he has bad takedown defense, there's just some fighters who are really good jiu-jitsu practitioners you see with low takedown defense because they're happy to play off of their back because they know they're so dangerous on their back. Joe Alvarez, UFC lightweight from Spain. He's a fighter who has like a 10% takedown defense or like 8% take. He's never trying to stop those takedowns because he has such a nasty guard game. He accepts them and then plays off of his back. And I think that's how Lopez normally approaches his fights. I think in this fight, he's going to look to sprawl and brawl just a little bit more, especially early, because I do think he has the striking advantage. I think he's the better boxer. He has really nasty uppercuts. And I think he's going to hurt Ortega early in this fight. So as I said, Lopez round 1 KO, plus 550 to plus 650 out there, absolutely interests me. The under 1.5, I think, is the best way to maybe play this fight or just approach this total. But I still think Lopez round 1 KO might be a better play just because if this extends, if this goes over 1.5, I think it's likely that Ortega has had some grappling success and that they did get tied up because I don't really see him just surviving for 7.5 minutes on the feet with this guy. And granted, I don't view Lopez as a future champion. I don't think he is as high level of his prospect as the hype that he's built up to this point. But I do think this is a good matchup for him to potentially get another knockout. So, yeah, I just don't like the way Ortega is trending. I think if they grapple, I would love to see it. I think the grappling would be phenomenal, especially with Ortega on top and Lopez on the bottom. And I think that's how Ortega wins the fight, is getting takedowns, getting on top, getting top time, landing ground and pound. So maybe a live bet on Ortega, but certainly pre-fight looking for violence props, the under 1.5 or Lopez round 1 KO. I'd prefer that under 1.5 at plus money to the under 2.5 juice. I just think if it goes over 1.5, it's probably going to a decision. If the finish happens here, I think it's in the first 5 minutes or so. So maybe even fight to end in round 1, some sort of iteration of Lopez early is the way I'm looking.
Billy, very similar thought process on your end. You are willing to lay a little more juice and take an additional round on an under.
Yeah, I'm mostly with Sean. We're seeing the same general concept here. The only thing he didn't get to and why I'm playing it a little bit more cautiously, I think, is because this was a short notice fight for both guys, couple weeks notice. Both push a pretty intense pace. Diego Lopez in the first round comes out so hard swinging for the fences. Ortega's going to have to push a pace to get it to the ground, as Sean pointed out. I just think there's a greater than normal odds of like a cardio finish in the late second round or early third round because of the short notice nature of this fight. If they had a full camp and I trusted their cardio a little bit more, I'd be 100% on Sean's side. Still like it. I don't think that's a bad bet by any stretch, and it's probably the likelier. It's really just, for me, I think, a risk tolerance thing. Do you want a greater odds of winning less money or lower odds of winning more money? Kind of how I view it. But yeah, other than that, I'm in lockstep with him. I selfishly want there to be grappling because I'd love to see that. But I think Lopes early, mostly through the striking, is probably my favorite way to, or not my favorite way, but the way I think this is most likely to go.
Okay, let's move on to UFC 303 Underdogs. Again, the T-Mobile Arena this weekend back in Las Vegas. Zerillo, a good week for dogs?
Not too many money. I'm only on 3 money lines. There were a lot of fights where I was like targeting props, violence props. I think we may see a inflation in these fights in terms of their finish props because the finish rate has been so low with the new gloves. I think there might be an overreaction in the market. So there were a lot of fights that I like the fighter to end inside the distance. So we'll get to more of those, or at least one of those in a moment. I do like, in terms of an underdog, Andrei Arlovski, and I like him to win by decision or by points, particularly his plus 3.5 point spread. I would imagine Andrei Arlovski wins one of the 3 rounds in this fight at a pretty high clip. The only way you lose that point spread bet is if he gets finished. And he's 45. He's been finished in 2 of his past 3 fights, but I don't view Martin Buday as a finisher. I don't even view Buday as that good of a fighter. He's the bigger man. He's going to be 25 pounds heavier. And he should have the grappling upside if he lands takedowns or if he wants to put this fight up against the fence with cage pushing, given that weight advantage. But his wrestling's not that good. He is 12 years younger, so he could be making improvements, absolutely. But he's 33. Guys make improvements on the 20 to 29 side of the age curve, not so much past 30. That said, he's still heavyweight. Heavyweights improve a bit later, and I'm backing a 45-year-old heavyweight because heavyweights kind of last a little bit longer in their career, and I don't think Arlovski looked bad in his last fight against Walter Cortez Acosta, who's a much faster, younger fighter. I think much faster than Martin Buday, much better athlete than Martin Buday, former pro baseball player, and just a big guy, but like moves pretty well, and much better footwork than Buday, much quicker than Buday. So Arlovski getting a guy who's a bit slower here, who's not going to throw quite as much volume. I think both guys slow down in the second half of the fight. This could get very sloppy down the stretch, but I really like, as I said, Arlovski plus 3.5 points on the point spread at minus 105. That was juiced up to minus 125 offshore. So if you get the domestic price on that, you look like you're getting a 20% or 20 cent advantage over the offshore number. But then Arlovski on the money line at plus 220, and then his decision prop at plus 330 as well. This should be a coin flip. If he goes the full 15 minutes, it is lined. Go to a decision about minus 140 or higher. If this goes the full 15 minutes, Arlovski will be as live in this fight as he is in every other fight. To be honest, I was annoyed this fight was on the card. I'm tired of watching Andrei Arlovski fights. All of them play out the same. They all look the exact same. They're all close and competitive. They're all 50-50 decisions, and you're waiting for the split scorecards from the judges. So, yeah, if he makes it to a decision, this is going to be a coin flip, and that's why I like the plus 3.5 point spread. Hopefully, there's no 30-27 scorecards.
Billy, as far as your dog, another replacement situation, Anthony Smith, your target in that price, still right around plus 120, plus 125.
Yeah, we're calling this a replacement situation for a fight that was originally Jamal Hill versus Khalil Roundtree and also had a stop at Carlos Ulberg in between there. So it's totally a new fight at this point, right? Like neither of the 2 original participants were there. Yeah. But Anthony Smith, slight underdog here. The big concern for me watching Anthony Smith in his last few fights has been his durability and his ability to take damage, whether that be knockouts, his legs, just kind of in general. He's had more than 50 pro fights, gotten beat up a lot. Brutal fight against John Jones was kind of the undoing there. Now he's fighting a middleweight. Roman Dolidze is a middleweight whose background is in grappling. Dolidze hits hard, because he knows he can come and swing for the fences and people don't want to take him down because they don't want to mess with his grappling. I don't know that that's the case with Anthony Smith. And obviously Smith just being bigger here is an advantage. But Smith should be able to pick him apart a little bit on the feet. He's such a smart, well-versed fighter that I'm fairly confident in his ability to avoid those big home run shots. And he's also an elite grappler of his own right, competes in some grappling stuff. So to get plus money on Smith against a middleweight, I feel like that's a fairly solid price. I don't think it's going to be the most exciting fight if Anthony Smith wins it. I think he needs it not to be. But also, last point, due to all of the shuffling, Smith was on this card for at least a week or two longer than Dolidze, which isn't huge, but a little bit more preparation. He's fighting his natural weight class. Should be much bigger and stronger than a guy coming up from 185. So if this fight were against a similarly skilled light heavyweight, I probably wouldn't make Smith a favorite, but against a middleweight, I'd take him as a slight favorite here. So plus 120 is a good line.
I should just mention, because you talked about the durability concerns for Smith. I kind of lean Dolidze round 1 KO. It might be a round robin prop for me. It might just be a small stab for me at about plus 450 to plus 500. If you were to go the other side, Billy, that would be like your biggest concern with the way Smith loses, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And again, because Dolidze's grappling is so strong, I've talked about this in a very few places before, but you see it a lot. And some of the older guys, like Johnny Hendricks was good at doing this. These guys with this good grappling, they can swing like crazy because they know you're not going to take them down.
Yeah.
Where if you're Alex Pereira and you're worried about a takedown coming back the other way, you can't overcommit on your shots because that's when you get taken down. So Dolidze does a really good job of using his grappling to make his striking good. Mm-hmm. I don't think Anthony Smith is that worried about the grappling, so it probably doesn't apply as much here. And yeah, also is to your point, Smith is a fantastic live play if that doesn't happen in round 1. Should be a little bit more prepared and have better cardio just because of being on this card a little bit longer, so that's the other angle to it.
Yeah, I thought the cardio dynamic in this fight was interesting because Dolidze normally doesn't have good cardio, but he is coming up, so that might help him a little bit. But it's also short notice, so that hurts him a little bit. So, you add and subtract for different factors. Yeah, I think I'd rather, personally for me, I'd rather have Dolidze round 1 and then probably live bet Smith after round 1. I think that's how I'd approach this fight. Anthony looks so shot. I mean, even his comments about like retirement or whether he's going to keep fighting. And then he ends up submitting Bellato. And then he's like, well, I may get UFC gold after all. And you're like, I don't know about that, buddy. Like, I feel like you're just setting yourself up for a worse KO from a better opponent. So yeah, I don't know if it'll happen in this fight, but I'm a little bit worried about how this story ends for Anthony Smith.
I will say the crazy thing about it, he's like a week and a half younger than Roman Dolidze.
Yes, they were the same
like
age. I initially thought Dolidze was going to be so much younger, and they're the same age. But the fight mileage is such a difference.
Yeah. I'm obviously a little bit tongue-in-cheek saying that. I will say to the point of like coming up a weight class, helping the cardio, I don't know how true that necessarily is. I think it can be true, especially with a full camp when you can adjust to the weight. But a lot of guys, when they go up a weight class, they're like, cool, I just get to be 10, 15 pounds heavier. But obviously, if anyone's gone for a run after putting on 10 or 15 pounds, it doesn't get easier, right? Like carrying that extra weight. So it's a double-edged sword in that sense. If I'm Roman Dolidze, hopefully his in-fight weight is about the same as it usually is if you're in his camp. We don't know, and we're not going to know because only like 2 states make the guys weigh in on fight night. So we don't really have a good baseline for that, but it's worth considering.
Yeah, it's somehow not a good fight, but an interesting fight to think about, which that doesn't happen often. It's like I didn't want to spend time thinking about this fight, but the more I think about it, like the more interesting ways I could see it playing out. So I don't even think it'll play out particularly interesting. It's not going to be your fight of the night, but there's some dynamics about it that make it interesting.
If it's fight of the night, it's a bad thing for Anthony Smith. If it's a boring fight, we probably like our Anthony Smith tickets.
Yeah, he wants the jab and low kick and put a little bit of that lesson on for 15 minutes.
The age factor is constantly discussed on this podcast, and it's a wash with these two.
Shockingly.
But you said it. The mileage is something you got to take into consideration.
Anthony's moving like a 50-year-old at this point.
All right, let's go to props. Where are we attacking the market this week, Sean?
Joe Pyfer inside the distance at plus 105, or potentially a same game parlay. I saw it plus 200. If the one book that lets you do same game parlays, you know which one it is. If you were to go into their customized parlays, the pre-built parlays, Pyfer and under 1.5 was plus 165. If you go into the same game parlay tool and click Pyfer, click under 1.5, you got plus 200. And getting double the price on Pyfer and under 1.5 as you get on Pyfer inside the distance, I think is interesting because he's finished all of his finishes inside of 8 minutes and doesn't have particularly great cardio. Now, he is coming off of a 5-round main event, a loss to Jack Hermanson, where I bet Jack Hermanson took over with leg kicks and with cardio down the stretch. But I thought Pyfer's cardio looked okay. Better than I thought it would. I thought there was a chance he was going to get finished in round 4 or round 5 before the fight. During the fight, cardio looked okay. And now dialing back to a 3-round fight should be fine. Zero concerns about his cardio over 15 minutes, where previously I might have had some concerns about it. Not only is he the bigger, stronger fighter in this fight, but he's also the better grappler. And I think there's a good chance he wins via submission against Marc-Andre Barriault, who can't grapple. Once you get Barriault down, he can't grapple. He can throw up a ton of volume on the feet, and maybe he could steal a decision late by out-voluming Pyfer over the final 7.5 minutes, winning the second half of round 2, winning round 3. But I think he's very likely to get finished before that. He's a really durable guy, handles damage well throughout his career, but did get KO'd by Chida Njokuani basically on the first exchange of the fight. He's been submitted in the past, and I think Pyfer is just going to be too strong for him and hit too hard and grapple too aggressively, potentially if he wants to win this fight. So Pyfer to finish this one, the under 1.5, combined with Pyfer at plus 200, or just Pyfer to finish at plus 105, I think absolutely will be bets for me. I projected this closer to about minus 120. So I think Joe Pyfer gets back on track here.
Billy, how about yourself? Prop for UFC 303.
Yeah, not necessarily my favorite bet, but definitely a fight I wanted to talk about between Peyton Talbot and, what's his name? Yanis Gamori. Wanted to make sure I was saying that right. It looked for a second this week that Talbot might close as the heaviest moneyline favorite ever in a UFC fight, which I think the current record is minus 2,500. He's between minus 1,600 and minus 2,000 right now, so approaching it. The one bet I kind of do like on it, and you could make a parlay and add Talbot on this, but it's not going to change it too much when he's minus 2,000, is the under 1.5 at around plus 150. I saw a plus 154 yesterday. There's a little bit of a narrative that Talbot is not a great finisher or not going to come out and finish it right away. He has said, and I believe it was before his last fight, that he wanted to make a concerted effort to start faster in his fights after picking up a lot of late fight finishes earlier in his career. And he knocked out Cameron Saman at the beginning of the second round. Cameron Saman, fairly well-regarded prospect in his own right, far better striker than Yanis Gamori. If he can do that to one of the best strikers in the division, at least from a technical standpoint, I don't see how he doesn't do it against Yanis Gamori, who got knocked out in his last fight. So this is a really fun fight. Talbot is a super interesting guy. Like, everyone should go check out his YouTube page. It's weird. It's very interesting. It's like old school skate videos, and he's playing DDR, and he does pole dancing for exercise, fully clothed, but he does pole dancing classes, and just a really interesting dude who apparently started training MMA kind of as a lark because he saw a Conor McGregor highlight reel and just said, hey, that'd be cool to try that. He is one of the most preternaturally gifted fighters I've seen in terms of his reaction time and his coordination and his ability to generate power in close spaces. And he can also grapple really well. Like, he sprawled and then front flipped over a guy and took his back in his UFC debut. Just always doing cool stuff like that. Very excited about this fight. I think if you're Talbot and you really want to put a stamp on I'm what people are saying I am, you go out and pick up an early finish. And again, he said he's trying to start faster. So to get big plus money on the under 1.5 makes sense. You can go under 2.5. It's kind of a similar dynamic to the fight we just talked about, where you're getting a little bit better price on the 1.5, higher odds of hitting if you go 2.5. Either way, though, I think you take that. And again, you could sprinkle Talbot on top of it, but it barely changes the odds. So,
Did you ever explore pole dancing as a training tactic?
I have not. No, it's
No.
I don't think it was as popular when I was coming up and when I was Peyton Talbot's age. But kids these days and their new fangled training technique, what will they think of next?
A TikTok dance?
Well,
Probably helps him with the scrambles in jiu-jitsu, right?
I mean, yeah, when he's front flipping over guys and
Swinging
doing
around
all
the
kinds of
opponent.
crazy stuff. Yeah,
If only you had
Latin
thought of that,
on.
Billy. You could have started the movement.
could have been in the UFC as we speak, but here I am on a podcast instead.
Yeah, I'm like half kidding, but I could see how the translation from like using your arms to like pull yourself to swing around the pole, like to generate that leverage, how that would help you a little bit in a scramble to like, leverage a limb of an opponent and then use that momentum to like swing yourself around them. So I could see the translation of the skill.
Didn't sound like you were half joking.
Yeah, no, he's a funny guy, Peyton Talbot. He's a very interesting guy. He pisses off a lot of the people in the MMA fan base because he's untraditional and a bit unorthodox with his style. But he's quite a prospect, and he's really fun to watch. And maybe we'll see him face Sean O'Malley one day. That would be the ultimate matchup. And I'm sure that's the dream matchup for fans, seeing the style that he fights with.
All righty, we will wrap it up now with best bets. A final bet, Zerillo?
Best bet. I didn't want this to be a best bet. I didn't want to bet Ian Garry. But I think with the amount of hate that Ian Garry receives, there is value on him in the betting market. People want to see Ian Garry get knocked out. He's cringy. He's annoying. But he's really talented. And he's 11 years younger than Michael Venom Page. He's so much faster. You see the 5-inch reach advantage for MVP on paper. That gives you pause. But Garry has probably the same reach advantage in his legs. They're just built completely opposite in terms of their physique. So MVP does have the longer arms, should be able to land the longer straight punches you would think at range. But Gary's quicker in terms of his hands, and his legs are much longer. He's going to be teep kicking MVP. He's going to be kicking his legs. And that's what MVP really struggles with, is kicks from opponents. Kevin Holland was mostly trying to box him. MVP also struggles getting grappled by opponents. We haven't really seen it a ton in his UFC run, but Ian Garry, primarily on Cage Warriors when he was younger in his career, loves to grapple. Good grappler, really good top control. He's training in Brazil now. I'm sure they're drilling a ton of grappling, a ton of wrestling, and I think that's where his massive upside, his minus 400 plus upside in this fight comes if he decides to wrestle and get on top of MVP. Now, I do think, given his relationship with the fans and his relationship with the promotion and the fact that he keeps having boring fights, I don't know how proactively he's going to pursue the grappling. I think if he wants to win, absolutely should. It's his easiest path to victory. I think if he wants to gain fans, put himself in title position, I think he's likelier to just strike this out and go for the KO. And I don't know if that is to his benefit, because MVP is very difficult to hit. He's got that karate style. He's a really good mover. He's difficult to get a read on and actually land on. And you could get in a situation in this fight, this is my concern, where Garry lands more volume, but MVP has the bigger moments, because Gary's one weakness as a fighter is his chin. He's been wobbled or knocked down in multiple UFC fights. When he gets hit clean, he tends to do the chicken dance a little bit. So I'm worried that Garry is going to win the majority of minutes in this fight, but MVP is just going to have two huge moments, one in different rounds, and end up stealing the fight on the scorecards because he ends up wobbling Garry. But aside from that, I think MVP is drawing relatively thin. I think he needs the KO, or I think he needs multiple wobbles in order to win the fight. Otherwise, Garry just has too many tools for him. As I said, the big speed advantage in terms of the hands, the better kicker, and then also the grappling upside as well. So Garry getting minus 150 on him, I think he wins closer to 7 out of 10 times than 6 out of 10 times. I think, honestly, it may even be closer to 8 out of 10 and 6 out of 10. But I projected it closer to 7 out of 10. I think minus 200, a fair price on him. So getting minus 150, absolutely something I need to bet, not something I wanted to bet. I even mentioned MVP KO on the podcast last week. That was my pre-fight read, or my pre-tape read. Coming out of it, I think Gary's the clear side.
All right, very good. And Billy, best bet.
Yeah, to Sean's point, Ian Garry has one other fight against someone with a listed reach advantage, and it was almost identical. That was Neil Magny, who he took down 2 times. Only fight we've seen him get multiple takedowns was when he fought a taller, longer guy. And he also outstruck Neil Magny 91-27. Magny's got not as good of a striker as Michael Page, probably a better grappler. I'm totally with Sean on that. This is another one where I don't think it'll be the most exciting fight throughout, but it's going to have some big moments. You hope the judges don't give style points for Michael Page, because if his leg kick was after doing a backflip and spinning around 3 times and Garry just landed a regular leg kick, those are the same amount of damage, but one of them looks a little bit cooler. So that's kind of the drawback on the Ian Garry side. But yeah, I'm with Sean 100% on that one. Another one, I'm less excited about it now because of the line movement, but that's Gene Silva. You can still get minus 102. took him at plus 105, maybe plus 110 earlier in the week. He is fighting Charles Jourdain, and if you watch him fight, they're like the same dude. They both come out very high aggression with the striking, kind of mirror images of each other, with Jourdain mostly fighting lefty. Both decent defensively. I would argue Silva has a little bit more power, but we've seen Jourdain knocked down a couple times before. He's a little bit older in terms of mileage and UFC fights, where I think it's going to be a pretty fast-paced grappling fight. And when Silva hits people, they react a lot differently than when Charles Jourdain hits people. Not that he doesn't have power. He knocks some guys out. It's been a little while on Charles Jourdain, so I don't know if he still has that in him the way that he used to. So in what I expect to be a close fight in terms of volume, I think Gene Silva should have the bigger damage and the bigger moments. So I would make him a slight favorite here. He's now minus 102, which again, I don't love. Was hoping to still get plus money on it, but would definitely take it at minus 102.
What do you think about the under plus money in that fight, Billy?
I thought about it, but I don't know. Like, both guys are fairly durable. Jourdain's almost one of those where you feel like he's due for some knockout regression, for lack of a better term, because he's been dropped and been hurt, but usually makes it through, which one reading of that is, wow, he finds a way to get through. The other one is like, it's a matter of time. I don't know how I feel about that.
Yeah, I think in a vacuum, taking Brazilians over Canadians, probably a good move. Starting to think about this a little bit more. Like, you know, as fans, we have more familiarity with Charles Jourdain. He's an exciting fighter. Like, he gets all this fan support, but he does consistently underachieve. And just think about like the training he's getting relative to what Gene Silva is getting. You know, it's I do think about this. The more we do these podcasts, and the more I handicap fights, like over time, you adjust your style. And I don't know how many Canadians I want to bet against Brazilians at even money in the future. Like, it's probably zero. So no offense to the country of Canada. It's just, how many more people does Gene Silva have to train with than Charles Jourdain? It's substantial. It's a huge difference in terms of the quality of training partners and the quality of training he's getting, you know? So yeah, I wish we had Bet Labs data on, like, and I could select countries like Canadian fighter versus, you know, Brazilian fighter. I mean, people have written for us in the past, you know, Reed Wallach, Eric Richter, they've mentioned, like, don't bet against Brazilian women. And it's something I've noticed over time. And now that I see these matchups where I'm like, you know, pick 'em fight Canadian versus Brazilian, do I really want the Canadian?
Yeah, and he's training with fighting nerds, right? Gene Silva's out of that team.
Good camp,
ton of guys at the UFC in the last year or two. Yeah.
Has Jourdain ever fought with a game plan? Does he, like, he just goes with the flow of the fight, right? It seems like he's just kind of like, he's just sort of flowing out there. And fighting nerds always come with a game plan. They always are exploiting opponents' weaknesses. So, yeah, I'm sure they'll have a good game plan for Jourdain.
Probably worth mentioning, too, Jourdain is not a bad grappler. He won his last fight by a guillotine, where he
got a good guillotine.
In a way, I was impressed because he did a good job regarding and finding the guillotine. In a way, I think it said more about his opponent, because Charles Jourdain went for like 4 guillotines before he got one to work. Like, how do you not adjust to that happening? Which is a different story. But in terms of offensive wrestling, Charles Jourdain's landed like 1 takedown in his UFC career, and Silva's averaging 1.5 for 15. So that could steal him a round or two, too, if we think this goes to a decision.
Next time we're here, we'll have to have Zerillo, like Tony Kornheiser from PTI, have to wave the Canadian flag on the sign off.
If Charles wins, I'll get a Canadian flag if Charles wins.
And wave it at the end. We are not here next week because the UFC's taken next weekend off. So we're back July 13th for Fight Night in Denver at Ball Arena. So that concludes the podcast. You all have the best of luck. And thanks for tuning in. Again, please subscribe, leave your 5-star ratings and reviews. Enjoy your 4th of July holiday, and we'll return in a couple of weeks for a UFC betting preview. Here on the Action Network podcast, we are presented by BetMGM. For Sean Zerillo, Billy Ward, Brendan Glasheen, thanks for tuning in. Best of luck.